Should we get started? Everybody ready? Well, between the Panthers game tonight and the cold weather, I'm honored you're here. My name's Bill Kearney, and I'm a local financial planner. This is part of our what we call adult financial literacy courses. And this particular topic tonight is college planning. So hopefully that's why you're all here. But I've been doing these classes here in Mooresville for just under 10 years now. I was looking back today, I think the first class we started with was the class of 2012. So it's been a while. And honored to be able to do these here at Lake Norman High School, which has been a good place for us to do all these. But tonight, and in my business, I'm independent in what I do, but in my business, one of our areas is actually college planning, and it's very unique because we have a program that works with students for college selection and then parents on the financial part. And so what you're going to see tonight is basically an outflow of that program, what we know about the college industry, if you will, to this point, try and get you up to speed on how things have changed, and give you as much information as we can. This is pretty high level information. This is what I call part one of a two-part series. So tonight we're going to go through as much college information in about the next hour to hour and 15 minutes as I can give you. And then part two, and this is for everyone here, if you want to come in and actually ask me questions, I always offer free consultations to answer your questions for that too. There's a gift certificate there. So I'll explain a little bit more at the end about how that works and what all that means. You guys all got a packet like this, similar to this, correct? And you probably started digging through it. So let me tell you what's in here before we get started. The first one's this College Planning Workshop packet. This is information to get you ready for what we're doing tonight. There's also an activity in here that we're going to do in the class. So this is the packet that we'll go through. Pretty much everything you'll need will be on the screen. When we're doing the class, if you see something and you want to take a picture of the screen, feel free to do so. Okay, I don't mind that at all. I'm also recording this, and I have a YouTube channel, so all my classes go up on the YouTube channel. If you heard something, you want to go back and figure out what we were talking about, you can go on there and see it as well. We'll give you the link for that. There's also what we call a take-home packet, which has some articles and other information in here for you. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the gift certificate, just a free hour to come in and talk to me if you have questions, that type of thing. No obligation or anything. We just like to do that for our attendees. So, before I get started, just a little disclaimer on the class itself. As I said, this is pretty high level. I'm not giving anyone in the room specific investment advice or specific planning advice. I always like to say, though, if you do learn something tonight and you apply it to your personal situation and you'd love to give us credit for it, we'll be happy to take it. But other than that, it's just a general presentation and what we're doing. I mentioned what we do and what this is. We focus really on the college admissions process, in particular making sure you find the best fit schools for what you're looking for and make sure expenses don't wreck your retirement, as we like to say. Now for tonight, I'm not selling anything. Tonight is just information. So just relax. There's nothing to buy here or anything like that. This is going to be a lot of information over the next hour or so. And this is what we're going to talk about. Basically what college looks like today from a cost standpoint, standardized tests, how to select colleges, what are the colleges looking for in students, and then we're going to get into the admissions process and paying for school, and the scholarship system and institutional aid, and how all of that works because it's changed dramatically. Show of hands, is everyone here class of 2020? So you're all in the junior class. Is everybody at Lake Norman High School? Are there anybody from another high school? Where are you from?
West Ireland.
Okay, so welcome, by the way. Usually we get mostly Lake Norman or South Iredale, so it's good to have some other faces in here too. So class of 2020, you're also going to see a real world timeline of what you can be doing both in junior year and senior year. That's the slide that everybody likes to take a picture of in particular because it gives you a real timeline on what to do. And then we'll go through some examples of what this looks like for students from the financial aid standpoint. So when we talk about college and the cost for school to start with, the average cost right now for public universities across the country is just under about $25,000 a year. Oh, before I go any further, if I don't forget, on the back, I'm sorry, of this the workshop packet right here, there is a little registration form. And I want to warn you about this because if I don't warn you, this will happen. Behind this, there's a note sheet. So if you want to take notes, take it on here, this little note sheet. If you flip this thing over and just start taking notes here, we have to leave this form here with us. We're going to tear that off at the end, okay? I want to make sure I said that because somebody invariably will take notes on the back and then have to leave it with us. So if you want to do that, we'll just keep notes on here. All right? Sorry, I meant to mention that earlier. So public universities, right around $25,000 a year. Your private universities are about 40 to 45, and your elite private colleges are now upwards of $60,000 a year. Okay? I know probably everyone kind of has an idea that it's expensive. Let me get this in perspective for you to give you an idea of how much this has increased over time. So this is a chart that shows you the annual tuition for Yale University back in 1970 versus the last year we looked at the data, which is 2014. So for Yale, this is per year. In 1970, you could attend Yale for $2,500. Okay? $2,500. Now, of course, it's well over $45,000. I think it's over $50,000 at this point. But that in perspective, the minimum wage was $1.45 an hour back in 1970, and the average minimum wage was $7.25 back in 2014. So you only had to work about 4.8 hours, and you could pay your way through Yale. Parents, did any of you work your way through college? A few of you, right? Okay. Now, if you wanted to do that today at Yale, how many hours would you have to work per day to pay your tuition? Try 17. So it's obviously risen much faster than what you could work to pay it off. You have to work 17 hours a day, then go to class, and then at some point sleep, right? It's not really possible to do it. So what you're going to see is these prices that I'm telling you, $25,000, $40,000, $60,000, these are what we call sticker prices for college. It's a lot like buying a car, okay? And most people don't pay the sticker price for a car. However, a lot of people do end up paying the sticker price for college. And what we figured out is there are some ways for you to work through this system properly to help minimize your costs. And what you have to look at this starting now, really, is a little bit differently than maybe you looked at it before. College is a business. They are in business to make money, and they are a big business. And what they have figured out is that this is about the only thing that we purchase as consumers where if they increase the cost of it, we attach value to that. We attach prestige to that. So the more a school costs a lot of times, we immediately think, wow, it must be a really great school. It costs $60,000 a year. It may or may not be. Okay? An example of this is a few years ago there was a study done, and there were a couple of colleges, small colleges. One was in Arkansas, one was in Pennsylvania. And the one college in Arkansas raised their tuition by 60% year over year for the incoming freshman class. Raised it by 60%. Their number of applications doubled in 1 year. Same thing happened to a school in Pennsylvania. So the colleges have realized, hey, if we can increase our costs, people will pay this, and we're making huge profit on all of this. Now I'm going to explain to you tonight how they're doing this. How do they do this, and how do they make money, basically? How does their system work? We'll show you exactly how that works tonight. So before we go any further, I just want to talk about SAT and ACT, standardized test students. Have any of you taken any of these yet? Okay. The websites there are where you would go to register for these tests. And I would suggest if you haven't gone to look at the schedule for these tests, you might want to go do that. Because the tests are not given every single month throughout the year. And I'll tell you what my team would tell you. We've got a team of folks who do student positioning. And they work with our students. And they're very particular about this point, which is it would be a good idea if you have the opportunity to take both of these tests at some point over the next few months. Not really necessarily prepare for them, do a whole bunch of study and effort, but go take them and build a baseline and figure out if naturally you test better on one versus the other. Okay? Because that way you could use that information and possibly focus on one test in the springtime of junior year, start doing all your prep work on that, and then maybe, just maybe, have all of this done in junior year. At this point, the colleges will take either test. Okay? SAT, The College Board and ACTstudent.org, those are companies. They actually compete against each other for your business. A few years ago, the SAT came out with a mandatory writing section. You may have heard of this. Well, because it was an extra section on the test, their test cost more. So they started losing market share to the ACT. So what did they do?
Got rid of that part of it?
They got rid of the mandatory part of it. Now it's optional, so they could drop their price down. Now be prepared that when you go register for one of these tests, pretty much within a few days you'll start getting mail from colleges. It's not because the colleges know anything about you, despite what the marketing materials will say. They know nothing about you, actually. What happened was they sold your information to the colleges. That's another way they make money. So what we like to do is help families cut through the clutter of that information. One of the things you'll hear me say probably a couple of times tonight is there is no substitute for a visit on campus, because a lot of the marketing material was created a couple of years ago. It's not the most accurate information you're going to see. So just keep that in mind. It does help start fires if you're trying to keep warm on winter nights, that type of thing. But other than that, it does not have a whole lot of relevant information, nor is it tailored to you, particularly as a student. They don't know anything about you at this point. I always like to go through this too. Is everybody familiar with how super scoring works? You want me to skip this? No? Somebody want me to go through it? Okay. So first of all, this is SAT super scoring. The ACT, not every school will take a super scored test. So let me go through this first, and then I'll explain how the ACT super scoring works. So let's pretend that you go take an SAT, and you get these scores on the math and the reading section, 600 to 500. That equals what? 1100. Pretty easy, right? So you say, you know, I'm going to go back and I'm going to study really hard and I'm going to get that reading score up and improve my, my overall score. So you go back and you take the test, and this time you get a 500 on math because you spent all that time on reading. And so now you have what? Now actually you have 1200 super score. What the colleges will do with the SAT is they'll take the best score from each time you took the test, and they will add those together and use them as a super score. You have any ideas on why they do this?
They're looking at your capabilities,
Right, looking at capabilities overall, kind of maybe giving you a little benefit of the doubt. Maybe you weren't feeling so great the first time and you were better next time, and so let's just combine the two and see what we have. Now, I know that over the years of doing this, a lot of families aren't quite familiar with how this works. A lot of you probably thought that you took it the second time and you still had an 1100, right? Well, when you go look at the average SAT scores online and you start to study these schools, you're actually looking at a super score. So if the score actually looks better than it is, really, right? Because technically you got an 1100 both times. But if it looks better than it really is, and maybe we don't quite know how super scoring works, colleges can kind of use that to their advantage a little bit, can't they? If they look a little more prestigious in comparison to their competitors, who are their competitors? Other colleges, right? What can they do? That's one example of what they do. So there is some good-natured reasons as to why they do this. They want to give you a little bit of the benefit of the doubt between two tests, but there is a business reason behind it too. So keep that in mind. ACT does not all schools will super score multiple ACT tests. So what you want to do is go to Google, type in ACT super score list of colleges, something to that effect, and it will come up. It changes every year. It's a little more difficult because of the way the composite scoring works on ACT for the colleges to do that. So if you're wanting to know if a particular school you're looking at does that, just Google it, it'll come up. Pretty much every college that we've seen does the super scoring for the SAT. Okay, this is actually the activity that's in your packet. If you will turn, should be on page 5. It says selection criteria. What I'd like you to do, we're going to start looking at what we think is important in picking the college. What you guys think is important. So here is a list of different things that might be important to you, and your packet has this condensed a little bit for you. Take a minute or two and just read through the list. Parents and students, if students are here, and maybe mark next to the ones that are most important to you. The things that jump off the page at you that is important in your deciding what types of schools you're looking for, and then we'll talk about it. Anybody have something that jumps off the page? What do you see?
Advanced Placement Credit Union.
Why is that important?
Because she's taken all these advanced placement classes, so we don't want them to be wasted.
That's a pretty good reason. What else?
Course offerings.
Course offerings. That's kind of important, isn't it? Let me mention something while you're doing this. Not to distract you at all, but does anybody know what the 4-year graduation rate is right now from public universities in the United States? What is the percentage of students graduating on time in 4 years?
25.
What was that?
25.
You're giving them too much credit.
Wow.
That's close enough, 24.9.
Does that stat take into account like co-ops and?
This is for people who take 4-year programs that could graduate in 4 years. If it's a 5-year program, that does not count in there.
Okay.
Now, only 60% graduate in 6 years. Okay, so back to our criteria. What else is important to you?
Environment.
Environment. Why is that important, sir?
You can get an education anywhere. It's what it's going to get out of the education. It's in class and out of class.
Yes.
So there's different things that's important.
Yep. You might learn as much outside of the classroom as you will in, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. What else, guys?
Academic program.
Academic programs. Anybody want to take a guess which one is my favorite?
Costs.
That's important, but it's not necessarily the first one on my list.
Football team.
Yeah, I went to Tennessee. That used to be important to us.
Financial aid.
Financial aid, close. How about halfway down the right side in that area?
Placement record.
Yes. What's placement record mean?
Whether you're able to get into a graduate school or find employment following graduation.
Yeah. Now, why is that important?
Because there were not.
Isn't that the point? Let's back up and recount for just a minute. So, the average cost is now over $25,000 a year. I just told you what the graduation rate was, right? Now, I don't have the most recent data, but just a couple of years ago, 82% of students that graduated moved back home for at least 6 months. So they don't count into the placement record for their school. All right? So maybe it would be kind of important to know when you go to that college what they're doing to get your student ready when they're finished. Let me give an example of a college that takes this seriously. Anybody from Delaware? Everybody laughs when I say that. I don't know what, I feel bad for people from Delaware. Everyone laughs when we do that. So the University of Delaware, anybody know the mascot? It's not important, really. It's completely useless trivia. No, it's the Blue Hens. You'll never forget it now. Joe Flacco, who plays for Baltimore, is there. But anyway, none of that is important. The University of Delaware has a group inside of their faculty, inside of their staff, and it's about 15 strong. And these people, what their job is to take the junior and senior class from the University of Delaware and travel around to Fortune 500 companies based on what those students are majoring in and pitch them to those Fortune 500 companies. Basically go out ahead of you and lay the groundwork for you to get an interview. The reason that's important is the University of Delaware is a public university and they have the #1 placement record in the country because they are intentional about it. No one's laughing about Delaware anymore, are they? Maybe we even might have added them to the list. But the point is, this is expensive. You know that going into it, right? it's not really going so well as far as how the students are managing themselves or being managed when they get there. And then the placement record for many of these public colleges is terrible. And it's a business, so I feel like if you're going to approach this from a business perspective, you might want to be asking at least that question. The answer to this is everything on that page is important. Everything on there is important. But from a cost perspective, from a business perspective, maybe figuring out what they're doing for 4 years when they have your students would be something you'd want to know and want to ask about. And if it's not a good placement record, it's going to be hard to find it on their website. It probably won't even be on there. So you're going to have to ask when you go visit. So placement record, that's pretty important. As I said, everything else is important. I didn't hear the students volunteer a lot of information during that exercise. So I'm going to tell you what my team has told us over the years are some of the typical answers they hear when they interview students for career positioning. These are the things they say are important to them as far as picking a college. Are you ready for this? Right? Education's trendy, it's a party school, but don't tell dad, good sports teams, and many other reasons like this. Okay? Great thing about that is when those same people interview the parents, their criteria lines up exactly the same, right? This is exactly why you're sending your kids to school and what's important to you, right? No, yours is something like this. Right? The quality of the education, I went there, it's within a 3-hour drive from home. Students, don't kid yourself, mom's going to want to come visit you. And the window sticker. Alright? So this creates a bit of a problem because maybe this is a little bit of a tough conversation. And also, it's kind of hard to know where to go from here. We have totally different opinions on what we think is important, right? Now students, I will tell you, your parents do have some wisdom. They probably walked down this road already, so I would defer slightly to them in the criteria part of all of this, but all of this is somewhat important. But I'll put it to you this way. This process, and you're going to see it through the rest of tonight, is complicated. Parents, you probably have had your heads down working. How many of you, this is your first child going to college? Okay, a little more than half the room. You've been working hard, raising a family. You went through the process probably, and it's now looking totally different than what you remember. Okay, that's pretty common. And the problem here is that time is moving quickly. And it's very difficult to go through this and figure out everything you need to know because you can't go back and do it over again. So I'm hopeful that tonight, the rest of what we talk about, you'll learn some things that will make you really, really good, smart consumers so you know what you're doing going forward. But, you know, my kids are 11 and 8. And when I started doing this, I could say, you know, my son, he's right here. When I walk out the door, I can put my hand on his head. He's now up to here, so I can't do that story anymore. But the point is, time is moving quickly. It's going to be Thanksgiving in a couple of weeks. We'll be into second half of the school year before you know it. And then before you know it, we'll be done with junior year. And when we're done with junior year, applications go in right after that. I mean, it's just around the corner. Okay? We just turned in financial aid forms for our families a few weeks ago for the seniors, the students here and all over Howard County. So it's going quickly. You still have time on your side, and I think a lot of what you're going to see tonight is going to help you, but just keep that in mind. Now, between right now and July of this year, summertime, wouldn't it be great if your student came to you and said something like this? Mom and Dad, I'm working toward the goal of acceptance by the University of, you can fill in the blank, okay? I don't know how that one came up. Tennessee is well known for its award-winning faculty. UT is credited for being one of the best universities at which to study engineering. And by the way, they offer one of their best financial aid packages in comparison to their competitors. Does that look a little different than the previous slide? Parents, who would like to hear something like that? Something like that, right? What does this tell you, right? It says, I'm working toward a goal. Oh, parents love goals. We love goals. Working toward a goal. I've done some research. Tennessee has some really good faculty for something that I want to go do. And they've got one of the best programs for something I want to go do. And you know what? I've looked at the way I've done in school, and I think they might actually help me get there. They do this financial aid thing. They might actually reduce their costs to help me get there. Wouldn't that be awesome, Mom and Dad? So from tonight till then, your research, you want it to end up here. You want your students to be thinking something like this. All right, so where do you start? Where do you start? Well, I would suggest you do some type of self-assessment for career testing. Any students done anything like this, or have you done one of these? And it'll come back and say weird stuff like you should be a funeral director or something like that. Nothing wrong with that, but it may not have been what you were thinking. You have to do something like this because some of these programs, we use one we created called Focus 2. Focus 2 is great because it tests your interests, your values, your skills, your personality, and it says people that are wired like you are typically end up doing these types of careers. They end up in these fields, and they're happy doing it. And here are some backup plans. So then once we know what our careers might possibly be, we can start to research them. If we like some of them, then we figure out what majors we're going to need to get into those career fields. And then once we know what the majors are, maybe we start to look regionally at the schools that have those majors, and we start building from the ground up that way. All right? So, I would say that in addition to some of the criteria questions we went over in the packet, here are some other questions you might want to ask colleges when you go visit. Right? What criteria for admissions is most important? If you were to ask an admissions officer that question, hey, what are you looking for in a student that applies to this school? When you get an application, what are you looking for? What do you think you can do with that answer? You can use it on, did you say on your application? You can, right? You could use that in a short answer or an essay and feed that information right back to them. That'll help you write some essays. How many of your students graduate on time or in 4 years? That would be good to know. How many students don't come back after freshman year? What's the washout rate? How many students apply each year to the school and how many are accepted? How selective are you? And then what is your enrollment yield? Of the students who are accepted, what percentage actually come here to school? Are you casting a really wide net? These are consumer-driven questions. If you're buying something, in this case college, this is the kind of information you need to know before you make a purchase, I think. If you think like this, you'll come up with 5 others. And one of the ways you organize this is if you ask these types of questions to every school you go visit, compare what the answers look like. You'll get some really good information that way, really good data. All right. Now, I mentioned about the career testing and then starting to build a college list. Perhaps what you do is you decide things like what other criteria is important, how far from home do you want to go to find that major. And that might help narrow your list down because you could start with 3,000 colleges and universities. That's kind of tricky. You're going to have to narrow that list down. What you're looking at here is a color-coded list. This is just an example. You could create something using Excel like this at home. It's an example of one that we use. And what this is, you don't even have to see what's on here. Just the colors is all you have to picture. The color coding gives you an idea of where you sit academically in relation to what that school typically accepts. So the green and the blue, that means that in this case we're looking at SAT. Your SAT puts you in the top 25% based on what they typically accept. Blue is a little bit higher category. That means based on your scores you might actually be offered honors college, that type of thing. And then the yellow and the orange, that means you might be closer to, your scores are closer to middle of the pack. Maybe bottom 25%. It doesn't mean you're not going to get in. That's just a caution. You wouldn't want to necessarily, let's see, in this case here, let's say you get an acceptance letter from Stanford. Well, the way this works is you get the acceptance letter and then several months later you actually get the financial aid award letter. I'll explain that whole process in a few minutes. You probably don't want to go and tell everyone that you got into Stanford until you know what it's going to cost. because it's gonna probably be about 60,000 a year, right? And if you're in orange, they're not probably gonna offer you any financial aid. They'll be happy to take your 60,000 a year, but that's gonna be it. So that's all it's kind of telling you, giving you an idea of maybe where to focus your efforts if you are cost sensitive. If you're cost sensitive to all of this. I just wanted to show you that. Again, it's something you can do. It's a great way to start to organize your college list around all of this. So I've got my schools, my colleges. Notice it says 6 to 10. When we get into financial aid, I'm going to explain why we recommend no less than 6 and no more than 10 colleges. What's next? Well, when you figure out which schools you're going to apply to, you really do need to get organized and follow all of their dates and deadlines, because pretty much all of them are different. And even if you apply to the school, they don't call you to remind you that something else is due. Follow all of their requirements. Part of the process that helps too is to send thank you letters and things like that to people that have helped you. Even say folks that have helped give tours and stuff on campus. That does help to separate you and differentiate you. So start there. So again, we're going to jump into the financial aid part now, because it does take a little bit of time to talk about this. I want to make sure we spend our efforts here. What's happened with the financial aid system is over the last 30 years, the colleges have really increased the amount of what they would call institutional aid that they provide to students. And it comes in the form of financial aid, gifts, things like that. And every year there's budgeted by the colleges about $30 billion a year that they can give away. And there's 3 types of aid. They look at grants and scholarships, which are great because they don't have to be paid back. Grants are typically need-based. Scholarships are typically merit-based. They do not have to be paid back. They also do not count towards your income, parents. Federal work-study programs, more common usually in graduate school, but you will see these offered to undergraduates as well. These do not have to be paid back and can give you a tuition credit. And then student loans. People say, well, loans, I have to pay those back. How is that financial aid? In many instances, the loan rates are less expensive than if you go and get them yourself. So you are saving some money in that fashion. The schools can give those to you, and that's one of the ways that they look at it as financial aid. So let me tell you what's going on here. This is a thing I like to call a tale of two boats. We talked about the costs earlier. We talked about how they're inflating and they've grown pretty quickly. So here's a little bit about what the colleges are doing. In the first boat, you have some students who are, in comparison to the colleges they're applying to, they're pretty good achievers. If you go back to that color-coded list, maybe these are the green and blue schools that they're applying to. So to those schools, these are pretty desirable students. Their scores put them in the top 25% based on what they typically take. Now, those same schools are also going to get applications from students in the second boat. These students maybe aren't as highly achieving as the students in the first boat. But here's what the college is going to do. If they accept the students in the first boat, and maybe they even reduce their cost to attend by $5,000, $10,000 a year to attract them to come to the school, the reason they would consider doing that is that their scores are highly enough or they're achieving enough that they can actually offset the students in the other boat. So it doesn't pull their averages down. Does that make sense? These students have done so well that they offset how these students have performed over here. The students in boat number 2 are going to full pay. They're just glad they got in. They didn't think they were going to get in. They're glad they did. This is how they do it. So they'll rebate these students because they need them. So they need these students to offset the performance of these. So what does that tell you? What is the most valuable thing to a college? Your performance. That's the one thing they don't have. Your academics. That information. So they need that. That's how their business basically runs. And this is what they're doing behind the scenes. So what you have to figure out is which boat are you going to be in. This is not talking about are you a great student. This is talking about your academic performance in relation to the schools you're applying to. So you wouldn't want to necessarily apply to all yellow and orange schools. That puts you in boat number 2. Make sense? Okay. So let me give you some quotes from the industry. This is an article that they've republished this many times, but it was written by a financial aid officer, unnamed, from a college. He was being interviewed and they were asking him about this whole financial aid system. And his quote was, there's a number of them in the article, he said, "Another pool of students may have no financial need, nonetheless we want to buy their talents for our university, so we use merit aid." And I don't think I have it on here, nope. The next quote below that, it should actually be on here, he says, "We use the available money that we have to buy the student body profile we desire." That's what they're doing, okay? Again, and if you want to find it, you can look that article up and you can see the quotes and how they do it. That's how financial aid works, at least at this point, in here. So before we go any further, let me give you some frequently asked questions or things we hear a lot about financial aid, because it's kind of this big nebulous thing. The first thing we hear a lot, or the first question people have is, well, this is financial aid thing. This is only available for poor families. That's not true. We have seen in the past, and I don't even know how some schools can do this, but we've seen folks with large investment profiles that have gotten need-based aid. I have no idea how the colleges justify it, but I've seen award letters with that on it. Okay? So that's not true. My income is too high to qualify. It's not 100% true. Colleges price themselves to leverage their available financial aid. Income is one of but many factors. I can't qualify if I own my home. Not necessarily. There's a couple of financial aid forms we're going to talk about. One of them does use your home equity. The other one does not. FAFSA. The FAFSA form does not look at your home equity as a part of the criteria. My students' grades are too low. Need-based aid is not dependent on grades. So if you look at a FAFSA form from a need-based standpoint, they do not ask questions about your grades. That's for the admissions office to determine. The debt load that I carry will help me. That's half the story. There's something colleges look at called visible assets. So you could have a ton of debt and you could have a bunch of visible assets, and that won't help you. This is an easy process. Anybody feel like it's an easy process? I've got a 529 plan. Anybody have a 529? Okay. Just be careful with these. The 529 plan, the colleges look at these like a resource. It's as if you created a little mini scholarship fund for your student. So what may happen, and I've seen this happen in the past, is you will get financial aid in year one if they want the student, right? Then when they see the money start coming from the 529, they may reduce what they're giving you dollar for dollar until you use up your funds. All right? Now, don't get mad at the person that sold you the 529 plan. Virtually no one knows how this works or what the colleges do with it. But the 529 is simply an education fund, and the colleges know you have to use it for that purpose. So it can harm you. It doesn't mean it always will. Everybody's a little bit different in how this works. I just want to warn you about that. And if you're not sure, you probably need to look more into that piece. So when we talk about financial aid, Princeton Review said the families who receive the most financial aid are the families who understand how the financial aid system works. The Ultimate Scholarship book said scholarship winners are not the superstars. They're the students who have prepared, invested the time to create applications that highlight their strengths. Thumb through this for a few minutes, guys, and we'll pass it around. This is the FAFSA form. We'll talk about this in just a couple minutes. The best strategy is to impress upon the college scholarship selection committee that you have a brilliant future. So, for financial aid, there is a super secret formula that the colleges like to use to calculate something called EFC. Does everybody know what EFC is? Anybody heard of EFC? All right, EFC is your expected family contribution. This form that is going around, this FAFSA form, when you complete this form and it is submitted, the Department of Education will calculate your expected family contribution. This is what they believe, based on the data on that form, you should be able to afford for college. I can tell you in about just under 10 years of doing this and doing hundreds of EFC calculations, I have yet to find a family who sees what their EFC is and actually agrees that it's realistic, okay? So here's the formula that they use. If you want to take a picture of the screen, you can. That's how they calculate it. It took us a while to figure that out, but there it is. All right? Now, actually, they take this 8 pages of data here on you, and they figure it out from there. So the colleges have a couple different ways. Some of them have their own forms. Some schools, there's about 400 in the country, use something called the Financial Aid Profile Form or the College Scholarship Profile Form. And then FAFSA, every college asks for this. Now the interesting thing about this form is called FAFSA, which stands for what? Does anybody have one in front of them? What is it? There you go. There you go. For what? Federal aid. But we're not talking about federal aid, we're talking about institutional aid. So this trips a lot of people up. They look at that title and they say, for federal aid, I'm not going to qualify for federal aid. I'm not filling this out and giving the government all this information on us. But this is actually the gateway that you have to use to give the colleges your information so they can determine what they're going to do with their institutional aid. And it does not say that on the form. So I think there's a number of families who self-select and remove themselves from that part of the process. The second thing that happens with this form a lot of times is people will fill it out incorrectly. When you look at the section that talks about parents' retirement assets, it says list something to the effect of your sum total of your investable assets, I think is the way they list it. So if you're filling that out, and you're totaling these numbers up in your head, oh, I got an IRA, I got a 401k, I got an old IRA. You add all that up, right? You come up with a number in your head and you put it down on the box. What's wrong with that? You're not supposed to include that. It doesn't say it there, it just says investable assets. So a lot of people think about all of their assets as their investments. Those are retirement accounts. And you're not supposed to include those on the form. Now it tells you that on page 2, way buried down in there. But if you stop reading page 2 after the first couple of paragraphs, you'll never see it. So you get past the title that calls it federal aid, you start filling it out, and you may over-report your assets. What have you just done to that expected family contribution? It's gone up. Now, when you look at this form, what does it remind you of? What does it kind of feel like? Tax form, right? And I think this is pretty similar to the tax system. In this instance, the colleges are trying to figure out everything they can about you to make you pay as much as you possibly can. And we are filling this out to hopefully get some aid to pay as little as we possibly can, similar to the tax system. But if you make a mistake on your taxes and you owe the IRS some money, maybe you have a CPA that does your taxes and there's a mistake, your CPA will call you, right? And they'll say, there's an error, the IRS sends you a letter, there's an error, and we fix it. And it's done. But if you make an error on this form, like with the retirement accounts, how many years in a row are you going to do that? Probably every year you fill it out, because it has to be filled out every year you're in school. So the mistakes you make on it can be a lot more costly than probably the mistakes you can make on your tax form. So similar, but also very complicated. I think it's complicated by design. I really do. I just think it's easier to do it this way for the school's purpose. Now, there are deductions and credits and things like that that are available to you. You can Google these, tax form 970. You can talk to your CPA or tax professional for details on that. Just make sure you let them know, hey, my son or daughter's going to school. Make sure you include that information on your taxes because you can usually find some types of deductions and credits. So this is the slide everyone likes to take a picture of. This is kind of a putting it all together slide, timeline. So for junior year, as we mentioned, if you leave here tonight and there's one thing you want to do tomorrow, I think it's maybe, if you haven't done something like this, starting with some career search and aptitude testing software, or something online that you can do. And some of you came in a little bit later, so I don't know where I was, but I was talking about SAT and ACT. And one of the things my team recommended, if you remember, was over the next few months, you might want to take both of those tests and get a baseline and figure out, if you go online, you can get a comparison chart and compare your SAT score to your ACT score. And you can see comparatively which one you did better on. And that might help you identify which is the smaller boulder to push uphill, right? Going forward into springtime. And then maybe you start working on your prep work. I think something my team would tell you, our student positioners would say, one mistake that families make a lot is they think their kids have to do great on both tests. And you don't. The colleges will take either one. So if you figure out, hey, the ACT has a science section. I'm a good science student. I tested better on that one anyhow. I'm going to focus on that one going forward. The only thing that would really happen to you if you've never taken an SAT test is the college might say, hey, we need an SAT score, we need you to go take the test. But they're not likely to decline you because they're going to use your ACT score in their work. Begin your college search. Check on the status of your high school path. I haven't mentioned that yet, but that's kind of important. Make sure you're on track to graduate. Begin work on a resume. Has anybody here done some type of resume, student resume? Okay. There is a particular college format that is good for students to use. And what we do with it is it's a one-page resume. It really doesn't have any academic information on it because the colleges are going to get that from your transcripts. This is something where you will highlight your accomplishments, things you've done, things you participated in that they wouldn't necessarily know on one page. All right? Nice and neat. And then in the top right corner, you put a nice professional looking headshot. The resume does a couple of things. Right now, you can use it for the people who you're going to ask to write your letters of recommendation because they may not know you as well as you think they do. And this will help them write a really, really nice letter. The second thing you can use the resume for is really important with the colleges is it's a way to differentiate yourself. Because think about it, when you apply to school, unfortunately, there's 1,000 other kids who are going to look just like you on paper. So when that admissions officer gets to your file, and these are real people that actually review the final cases they're looking at, and they're flipping through, and they see this resume with your bright smiling face on it, they're going to stop. And frankly, you don't even care if they read what's on it. You just want them to recognize that you did something that no one else on their desk has done that day. Very simple thing to do. We even had a student years ago who took their resume and put it on, I'm not saying you have to do this, they put it on the bottom of a sheet cake and sent it to the college they really wanted to get admitted to. For real. And then they panicked because they realized they didn't tell them it was underneath the cake. So they wanted to make sure they let them know, but fortunately they found it. Kids do all sorts of things now with the resume to try and help differentiate themselves. I don't know if that makes any difference, but that was pretty creative. Begin the search for local scholarships. This is where your admissions office or your advisor office here at school can help you. And by the way, one of the things you may have noticed is that the advisors at school can't really get into all of this information, can they? It's a little difficult because they've got 500-600 kids they've got to deal with. And a lot of times they're focusing on the kids to help improve graduation rate. So, but one thing they can really help you with is they keep very good lists of your local scholarships, the information on those and the dates and deadlines. Of course, you can use Google. And in junior year, there are certain scholarships around here locally that you can only apply for them in junior year. And what you'll find is a lot of these scholarships go unapplied for. What you want to do with the scholarship part of this, now these scholarships are different than your institutional aid. Okay? These are your local types of scholarships, maybe your $1,000, $2,000 scholarship. What you want to do is look at what the requirements are for the scholarship, how much time it's going to take you versus what they're offering. That kind of gives you a good idea of whether it's worth it, right? And then the other thing to do, probably by springtime of junior year, is start your college visits. There's just nothing better than boots on the ground studying these schools to get a good feel for it. Our team would recommend that students bring a backpack with you and try to fit in and maybe go to a coffee shop, and if you're this kind of person, maybe strike up a conversation with somebody and ask them what they think about the school, how they ended up here. Maybe see if you can kind of picture yourself being at school there. Shake loose from mom and dad for a little bit and kind of visualize yourself there. Senior year, finish strong academically. That means if you have the opportunity to take a couple of difficult AP classes, that would look good for the schools. Finish strong academically. Maybe you take the SAT and ACT again. Keep an eye on your dates and deadlines. Refine your college search. Maybe some more visits now. When we hit September through November, but really my team would say by the end of October you should have all of your applications in. Resumes, letters of recommendation, all of that, whatever they're asking for. October 1st is when that FAFSA form can be submitted. Now, let's say that a college, let me back up for just a second. Let's say college's deadline for application is March 1st. Should you wait till March 1st? No. Would it be better to maybe be in September? It might be better to be on that stack of applications that is at the very beginning of the year as opposed to in the stack that's between them and their Christmas break. You might get a little bit more consideration that way. Same thing with FAFSA. Now, a lot of this institutionality is first come, first served. So getting that form submitted as quickly as you can. Again, some of the other forms schools need institutional forms like the profile form. Those have different deadlines of when they're submitted, so keep an eye on that. Now, this is where it gets interesting. All of this is in the fall of your senior year. Through the fall and the winter is when you're going to get the acceptance letter from the colleges. Most colleges will send an acceptance letter, and sometimes that acceptance letter will say, congratulations, you're in. We would love to offer you a scholarship of $5,000 or $10,000. And the mistake that a lot of people make is they think that is their award letter, that that's the financial aid. And it's not. The financial aid award letters don't show up until March and April of your senior year. This is a very protracted process when done correctly. I think they specifically wait till March and April, not because they don't have the information to make a decision, but in their minds they don't have all the information. What happens in a lot of cases between the time you're accepted and the time your award letters come is you're being peppered by the school to turn in your deposit, to secure your housing, to commit. And what have they not done yet? They haven't given you the award letter. So there are a number of people who will say, all right, I got into Chapel Hill, or I got into NC State. Let's go ahead and send in the deposit. Let's get the, and they send it in, and they totally circumvented the financial aid process. Your file just got moved over here. So once all of that's done, all of those families are done, now they're going to send out the award letters to the rest of the students that they desire to have based on what's left. And that's how the financial aid picture is made up. March 15th to April 15th is when the award letters come out. I think on the next slide, yes, this is an example of what they look like. And this is how you're going to know it's an award letter. It will say something to the effect of fall and spring. Fall term, spring term. And it will give you a total number on there. That's your financial aid letter. And it will give you an idea of what your total costs are going to be. It may just have a loan on it. But it will tell you what your final costs are going to be. And then it's a quick process. You can actually go back to the schools and appeal for more aid if you don't believe your award is fair. There is an entire process for that. You can negotiate with them. And the other thing to keep in mind here, they used to mail these letters directly to your home. I believe now all of them are emailing them to the students. It's another way they get lost. And then decision day, your acceptance is May 1st. So in other words, when you get accepted, your seat is guaranteed until May 1st. Remember that. National Decision Day is May 1st. Then, maybe before, maybe after, you've got to turn in your housing applications and get all of that done. So from our standpoint, this is what it needs to look like. Yes, ma'am?
So you're saying that award letters come after the acceptance? When is the acceptance?
It can be all over the map. This year, for example, students that applied to Tennessee found out in September they were in. You may not hear from Chapel Hill until the end of January. I think Chapel Hill sends their award letter and their acceptance at the same time. So the acceptances are all over the map. And it's a hurry up and wait.
So if you get, when in your example, when you say you get, they said $5,000 in the acceptance letter,
Right?
what kind of money is that versus what you would get in an award
It's
letter?
in addition to it. So the acceptance that they gave you with that, this award letter is going to be in addition to
So
that.
that's more like the merit-based money?
Yep,
In
right.
the acceptance letter?
Mhm.
And
Or it
that's-
could just be that, yeah, it could be that from your background, your standpoint, you qualify for this amount right here off the bat. And then we're going to send you the award letter, and there'll probably be more on the award letter.
Will the award letter include the other money?
It's all, yes, it usually, yeah, it will reference that you qualified for this scholarship 3 months ago. Yeah, that's a good question.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So if you get the acceptance and it says you have 5,000 or whatever, and you commit, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
so, and you were saying that the colleges now put you in this stack, does that mean that you don't get an award? If you were to have committed, they don't even bother to?
You'll still get an award letter, but who knows what it was supposed to
Right.
look like.
Okay.
You're saying if you accept before you get your award letter, they could
They can
pull
reduce,
the award?
not pull your award. They'll still give you the 5,000, right, that was on your acceptance. But there's a pretty good chance your award letter just got reduced.
For monies above and beyond that 5,000?
Correct.
Okay.
You accept and you send money in.
They're like, why do
You're
I need
the
to
one.
give you anymore? Right.
Right.
Now, some schools do what are known as non-refundable, and others do refundable deposits. So obviously there's a difference there, but you're still indicating something. So is it really worth the 200? I can tell you, in, like I said, just under 10 years, I have seen one student, we've had just about 500 come through our doors, one who didn't get their preferred housing because they waited. That's something they use all the time. Say, oh, do it, you won't get your preferred housing, send in your deposit. I've seen it.
What about early acceptance?
Okay, good question. So I'll get your question in a second. So there is a difference between early admissions and early decision. You probably heard those terms thrown around. Now, early action and early decision. The colleges have about 6 different ways that they define this, but typically early decision means you're applying to a school based on a specific timeline of acceptance, and if you're accepted, you're committed to that school. That's early decision. We really never recommend you do something like that. Unless it's for some reason you have got to get into that school and you're willing to pay anything for it. It's the same way, you can buy a car that way too. You can run on the lot and say, that's my car, what do I pay for it? You can do it if you want. Early action usually follows the same timelines as early decision, but you're not committed to the school. So that's a little bit better way to do it.
And if the early action, then are you still guaranteed the seat until
Yep.
May 1st?
Correct. Unless they tell you something different on the letter, but May 1st is your decision day. That was a good question. Yes, ma'am.
So to wait to accept your award letter, aren't many of the college acceptance letters, don't they have a deadline date for when you say you have to let us know that you want to come?
Yep.
What if those dates are what if one comes before the other?
They won't, because it's coming from the same school.
Okay.
And I'll tell you that 99 times out of 100, it's May 1st. That your seat is guaranteed until May 1st. And they do that for not just you, but a lot of times they'll defer students, and they're trying to figure out, that's part of this process too. If you get you're deferred, you're kind of in, but not really. Now they're trying to figure out, well, who accepts over this dead period too? And if they get too many students who are a little bit better than you to accept, that's when you don't get in. That makes sense? So that's playing into your acceptance as well, but that's why May 1st is important to these schools, because they know how much time they have to deal with this. I'll tell you that I know a couple of admissions officers at Davidson College, And they have told me that they have these awards figured out by January. And they hold them.
So in summary, hold on to the acceptance letter or the award letter. Once you have both, then you decide whether you want to accept it or not.
Put them out in front of the table and look at your now, I said 6 to 10. Here's why I said 6 to 10 schools. This is from a strategy standpoint. If you apply to 2 colleges and you're going through this process here, that same financial aid office is going to look at you and say, we got a 1 in 2 shot of getting this kid. Conversely, if you apply to 15 schools, we got a 1 in 15 shot of getting this kid.
How do they know?
Because you want them to know what other schools you're applying to. You want the college to know who their competitors are, who they're competing against.
Part of the leverage.
How do you let them know that?
You let them know on your application. They're probably going to ask you on the application, where else are you applying? Just list it alphabetically. Don't put a heart next to NC State or whatever, right? Don't do any of that. Don't want to know. But you want them to know who their competitors are. That's important. Yes, because you get the award letters back, you put the 6 letters out on the table, your favorite school is over here, and school B is over here, and school B offered you more, but you don't want to go there. Perhaps you call school A and you say, hey, I really like you guys, but school B offered this. Can you help us out? Please? See what they do. We do a lot of financial aid leveraging from that standpoint. That's exactly why you do it, is for leveraging. Yeah, you could already know in September which school you're going to get into and which one you want to go to, but you should still go through this and see what your value is to that school. And get the most out of it, because by the way, this point, going into senior year, when you apply, that is when you have the most value to the college. Yes, ma'am?
If you get waitlisted, how does that timing work? Do you know what your award is when you get waitlisted?
Nope. Usually not. Now, I shouldn't say no. Some schools will let you know, but usually they don't let you know until you're accepted what that's going to look like.
So if
And
you,
they'll usually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, they'll usually tell you, we'll let you know by June 1st if you're in or not.
so what do? You have to accept your other ones by May 1st.
I know. That's tricky, isn't it? You could lose all of those seats if you wait. That's part of what they're trying to figure out. That's tricky.
But you said some of them are refundable,
The deposits. Yep.
which is what you would,
Yeah, I think that's what I would do.
when you commit, right?
I would send in the refundable deposit ones and just hold my spot. And then if I don't get them June 1st, I'm going to one of those schools. Just look at that on the, if all of them are non-refundable, that's a little tricky. But typically you'll have 1 or 2 that are refundable deposits.
So you're gonna talk about backup schools and,
As far as what your backup schools should be,
not should be, but how many should, so 6 to 10,
mhm,
good. How many of those should be, I really wanna go to this, I mean, competition is crazy.
Yep.
NC State, Ohio State, my son's, the ones my oldest son tried to get into. And how many backup schools versus schools?
you know, that might go into your color coding, because you probably want to have at least, of the 6 to 10, at least 3 that are green, where you're in the top 25%, because then you're probably gonna get admitted to those schools and it's gonna look pretty good. So 1 of 2 of those 3, or, that mixture right there is gonna make up some of your backup schools. You probably don't want 1 green and the rest orange and yellow. That's a little difficult to do. That's why it's important to know. So what you're trying to do is balance what you think you want to pay or can pay, or what the financial aid is going to look like, versus a good fit. Because not only are you, if you're in the bottom 25%, is it probably going to cost more, but as a student, you're probably going to be struggling for 4 years, right? You're in the bottom 25% based on what they typically take. Whereas conversely, if you're in the top 25%, hey, you might actually excel at that school too. Not only is it probably going to cost a little bit less, but you're closer to the top academically in comparison. Does that make sense? So that goes into your best fit schools as well.
Although, even though you could be in the best fit, in the top 75% or top 50%, that's no guarantee you're getting it.
True. Yep. Unfortunately not. It could be totally, a good example of that is Clemson has totally changed in the last 3 or 4 years and how their admissions works and what it looks like. Does anybody know why that might be? Football. Football. Football is such a huge generator for the academic side, because now Clemson used to do the same thing South Carolina would do for in-state rebate for North Carolina kids. If you had certain levels of achievement, South Carolina and Clemson would reduce their rates down to in-state. Clemson doesn't do it anymore because they don't have to. Way too many applications. They have the pick of the litter right now. So that's why UNC Charlotte started a football team.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Is there a big difference in what they charge for tuition if you go in the state where you live as opposed to going out of state?
Oh yeah. Well, it depends on if it's public or private. Public school, yes. Private schools are typically the same no matter what. Yep, my alma mater was $17,000 a year out of state. I'm from here. Went to Tennessee. It's now $46,000 a year. I mean, for real. All right, just want to show you a couple quick case studies before we wrap up, okay? And this is just giving you an idea of maybe dispelling some things you might think about costs for schools and that type of thing. But really, you want to have a clear picture of your finances. You want to know, you just want to have your academics and your finances kind of figured out. It's a really good time to do all of that. So this is one I call a lesser school. So if you look at colleges and you start looking at it and you're like, man, Wake Forest, $60,000 a year, and mark that one off the list, right? Well, here's what happens. This happens a lot. This is the same student applying to two schools. One is a private school, one's a state school. Private college is $62,000 a year. This is their EFC. So when they sent that nice, lovely form into the Department of Education, DOE came back and said, your EFC is $15,000 a year. By the way, they don't tell you that. That's not how they tell you. They send you something called a student aid report. They list 15000 on the form. It looks to you like a code. It has no dollar symbols or commas on it. So you don't know this is your EFC unless you came to this class tonight. So glad you're here. When you get your student aid report, you're going to know that number is your EFC. It's not some code in a system somewhere. That's what they think you should be able to pay. So you take the cost, you subtract your EFC, the difference is $47,000, right? A lot of your private schools have need formulas that are different than your public schools. So in this case, the need formula, meaning of the $47,000, how much are they going to start out looking at? They'll look at 100% of this $47,000. And then they'll say, all right, we're going to mix out our financial aid package this way. We're going to give them $7,500 in a loan. We're going to give them a rebate or a reduction or a scholarship, or whatever they want to call it, of $39,500. So their EFC, $15,000 plus the loan, means the true cost is about $22,500 to go to that school. Slide over to the state university, same family, $33,000 a year, $15,000 for their EFC. Their need is much smaller starting out. This has to be better. The problem is, most of your state schools, their need formulas are much different. So that means, off the bat, you have to come up with 40% of this $18,000. So you got your EFC plus 40% of this. They come back and give you a loan. That's another amount you have to pay back. Their gift aid is $4,800. So what you have to come up with is $7,200 plus the loan plus your EFC. That's $28,200 per year. So this happens a lot where the same student applies to these schools, and because of the way private schools can apportion their funds differently, you might actually be able to go to the private school for less than the state school. And this is another reason why you want them to know who their competitors are, right? Because if they want you as a student, this is what they're going to do. So that happens a lot. Again, $62,000 is a sticker price. We'll put you in that car today for $22,500. So what have we learned today to kind of wrap this up? Obviously, standardized tests. I didn't mention this, but there are a number of colleges, and it seems to be shifting in this manner, that are really going standardized tests optional. Your Ivy League schools are optional on taking the SAT scores and ACT scores. All right?
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
So am I getting from that then that the performance during the 4 years or 3 years of high school, they're viewing that as more important than the standardized testing?
Especially a lot of the private schools like that look at your academics, but also your personal attributes. Because they have less seats in their school, right? It's not like in Ohio State, which is huge. They have less, so they're trying to look for a very diverse amount of candidates. So those are things that are more important than how you performed on a standardized test to them. The importance of selecting the right schools to apply, the 2 votes, right? The 2 votes. What are the colleges looking for? Remember, always remember they're a business. When you go visit them, it's awesome. They have the best marketing plan in the world, but they are a business. They are a business. How the financial aid system works? We always say retirement or college. That's part of what we look at, just because if you've got 1, 2, or 10 kids you're going to put through here, this is going to be expensive. So you got to figure out what that's going to do to the overall picture. And in my world, I'm a planner. I don't care whether it's college or going to the beach or retirement. I think you need a plan. I think you need a roadmap for it. And I think college has become so complicated, you certainly need that. So just keep that in mind. And don't put this off. Guys, it's November. You still have time on your side. But like I said, it's going to be January and on through there. So start doing some of this stuff now. And I always say it's important now more than ever to prepare well in advance for college, because you cannot go back and do this over again. Students and families have to be positioned well together. Sir, do you have a question?
Yeah, if you decided to go to JC for 1 or 2 years, do you have any leverage as far as getting financial aid or anything like that as well, going in as a, potential junior or sophomore going into all these schools?
Yeah, any aid that they're going to do for a transfer student is few and far between. It's limited. It's going to be totally different than this, because they cannot use your academic information 2 years later. So it really doesn't have value to them at that point. Doesn't mean that's not a good route to go, but sometimes it works well to go through this type of process first, but always have that as a backup plan. Just don't have them out of sequence, because you might limit your options. There are instances where it may actually cost you less to go the 4-year route than the 2-year route, where the 2 years are full pay. Make sense? Good question. This is just a little image of, I always talk about planning. We use a planning system called a retirement income machine. We build in a college expense buffer. If you want to know more about that, I'll tell you about it if you come see me. It's not critical tonight. I just wanted you to know kind of how to think about these things. I mentioned, and I'll answer any questions at the end that you have, but I mentioned earlier, if anybody wants to come in and see me, there's a couple of ways to do that. First of all, before you go, it would really be a tremendous help if you would take the very last page of your kit here, which is this registration or the response form here, and just tear this off and fill this out with your name. We actually keep these, and it's our way of proving to the IRS that we performed the class so we can deduct our expenses, all that good stuff. So your names and stuff on that will help. Part 2, I always say, is at our office. That's very simple. You come in, we will talk for 45 minutes or so. I'll ask you questions, you'll ask me questions. I will tell you if you want to know what our program looks like, and then I will send you home with it. You don't make any decisions in our office. I can't tell you about our program tonight because I'm not selling anything or providing anything. That's my deal I have with the schools. But I'll give you all that information so you can see what an actual laid out, thought out process looks like for you and for your student, and then you get to take that home. So if that's something you're interested in, just check the box here, and we will call you, and we'll figure out a time to get together to do that. If you come in, and you sit down with me for 45 minutes, and you decide after 45 minutes, hey, the class was great, I learned more in the office, but I don't want to see you again, that's fine. I'll just tell you that when I see you in Sam's Club, don't hide behind the giant mayonnaise jars. It's not awkward, it's okay. You've learned some good things, hopefully you can take them and apply from them from there. So we just want to make sure you know that there is a lot of good information out there that you can probably use to your advantage. I've probably given you about 20% of it tonight. So there's a lot more you need to know. And if you've heard some things that you think are important or you have questions about or you'd like to just talk a little bit more one-on-one about these things, let me know that and we'll schedule a time to do it. And would love to see each and every one of you in our office.
Do you bring your student?
We say if that would help, if you've got, absolutely. Usually it's kind of half and half, so it just depends on parents and schedules and all of that. But we always recommend that. Yes, ma'am.
You might have gone over this already, but how important, I guess, are your GPAs starting in your junior year?
Yeah, very important. I would say that my student positioning team would probably tell you that's the whole driver of the process. Even though we talk about SAT a lot, and we show it on, that's our only way to standardize things across the United States. But GPA can make up for a lot. It can make up for a lower test score. And so what colleges will look at is to say, all right, so you were down here starting junior year, but you went like this. That's a huge positive, right? You got it in gear, you're engaged, and you're moving on. So yeah, it's very important. It's a very good question.
What about like those honors classes, AP classes, and just your regular English, etc.?
Right.
If a student is in like an AP, but then maybe wants to drop back to a regular English, and still does that hurt or help or?
No, I think what you don't want to do in this whole thing, whether it's picking schools or picking classes, is be out of sequence with the kind of work you can handle or the kind of school you can handle. It doesn't make any sense to take an advanced or an AP course and get a D in it, right?
Right.
It'd be better to take a regular class or an advanced class and get an A. There's nothing wrong with that. My team would tell you the same thing. That's it for what I had, guys. If you would not mind, when you leave our form in the back before you go with your information on it. And if you have any questions, we'll stick around and we'll answer them. Was this helpful? Are you glad you came?
Yeah.
Good use of your time? Okay, good. Well, if you have any questions, please stick around. If not, thank you guys so much for coming out. And we hope to see you soon.